Welcome to this module on analysing qualitative data. By completing this module, you should be able to identify the various phases in qualitative data analysis, as well as using the basic analytic tools, including open, axial, and selective coding in conducting your qualitative data analysis. So there are a variety of ways or approaches to analysing qualitative data. The three most common include content analysis, thematic analysis, and grounded theory. The approach, I guess, in terms of which analysis to take, really depends on your research question and the theoretical framework that you've employed in gathering your qualitative data. Now, what we've covered in this module today is a fairly introductory version to qualitative data. The field itself is quite in depth, and you can spend a lot of time working your way through the various, I guess, theoretical models of qualitative data. What we've tried to do here is provide you with the most pragmatic or practical approaches to collecting and analysing qualitative data. So as we mentioned, qualitative data, depending on how you collect it, so whether it be from an ethnographic, phenomenological, or action place research perspective, the researcher or you as the individual collecting the data are involved with the process. So the first thing to consider is to reflect upon your influence as the researcher or the person collecting the data. As we previously mentioned in our qualitative design module, data collection from a qualitative perspective can be very subjective. So how you see things and how you interpret the world may also influence how you interpret the data. And how you interpret the data can impact upon the level of subjectivity or objectiveness of your data analysis. So there are two types of approaches to analysing qualitative data: inductive and deductive analysis. So deductive analysis begins with having a pre-existing theory. So that might be derived from a literature review or other research or evaluations that you've done in a similar field. From that pre-existing theory or hypothesis, you collect the data in order to test the theory or hypothesis that you may have. The opposite is what we call inductive analysis, where there is no pre-existing theory or hypothesis. You merely go out to collect the data from which you can then develop your own theory or responses or interpretations of the data. So very much deductive analysis aligns itself with what we call grounded theory, whereas phenomenology, ethnography, participatory action research aligns itself with more so inductive analysis. So depending on where we sit, qualitative analysis can either be descriptive or interpretive in its analysis. So both content and thematic analysis sit more so on the descriptive elements or aspects of qualitative data analysis, whereas grounded theory by its very nature is more so focused about interpreting the data and what theories can be generated based on the data that's been gathered. So content analysis can also be defined sometimes as summative content analysis. So to a certain extent, we're looking to quantify some of the qualitative aspects of our data. So the aim of I guess, content analysis in this sense is counting the number of words or the frequencies or who's speaking in terms of trying to create some sort of context or narrative about the data itself. So, for example, if you're reading over a particular transcript and a particular word keeps on appearing and appearing and appearing, you may count the number of times that it appears and use that as your basis to code the data. So both grounded theory and thematic analysis use the process of data coding. Grounded theory uses more of a theoretical sample, whereas thematic analysis does not. Thematic analysis, like I said, is much more along the lines of phenomenology in terms of recognizing patterns within the transcript, whereas grounded theory focuses on formulating a particular hypothesis based on the data that's within the transcript or interview that you've conducted. So as you can see, or I guess begin to appreciate, data analysis from a qualitative point of view can be quite intricate. What we're going to do is step back and I guess look at it from a perspective of what is the most common approach to coding data. So forgetting whether it's content analysis or grounded theory or thematic analysis, they all pretty much take the same approach in terms of what we're about to explain. And all of them really use these three coding procedures that are referred to in the literature as open coding, axial coding, and selective coding. So over the next couple of slides, we're going to demonstrate that. But essentially, I don't know if you can see it in the slides, but hopefully you can. Coding is really looking at the transcript of the interview, so whether it be the in-depth interview or the focus group interview that you've conducted, and identifying themes that keep on occurring or things that seem of interest, from which you'd start highlighting them together. From that, you can then start pulling together the quotes or the aspects of the transcript that seem to relate together, from which you can then create a key theme. So in this particular instance, these things that have been highlighted in this response may all fall under this key theme of acknowledgement of limited knowledge and professions. So we'll work through this process of open, axial, and selective coding. So open coding is really the first step in the coding process. It breaks down the data and basically reconceptualizes it. So you're going through that initial highlight of the transcript, from which you'll then start pulling it together. By doing so, you're trying to draw comparisons between events, actions, interactions, other narratives within the transcript. It tries to label the raw data into broad categories, and so hopefully by doing so we can then establish some type of initial relationship within the transcript and the data that we've got. Axial coding is the next step. So by doing our open coding, we may have potentially 25 categories that we've pulled out of the transcript. Axial coding then tries to take those categories and I guess arrange them in a way that we're condensing the categories into I guess more central categories or themes. So we're looking at I guess subcategories and seeing whether or not they can be aligned in a particular way. So there's a lot of sort of give and take. So you may take certain categories, think that they relate to one particular theme, then realize no, they may be more appropriate to another theme. So it's a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle, trying to identify where things fit together and how they connect within the data itself. So finally, selective coding is the last step of the coding process, and that's where we identify, I guess, a central code or a central theme, and from that we identify 4 or 5 themes that relate to it in some way. So I'm going to try and provide, I guess, an example of that in the next slide, where we run through open, axial, and then selective coding. So here we have an example of a particular transcript. If you want, you can pause the slide at this point in time, read through it, and then hit play again, and then we can work through the potential themes that are in this particular transcript. So with this particular example, we've got the interview and the transcript. If we look at the red ink, what we've tried to do there is that first aspect of open coding and highlight things that seem to be happening within that narrative or within that paragraph. So aspects that relate to relationships, goals, work, depression, parenting, and so on. So from that, we can then identify, I guess, several categories just from that one little transcript there that keep on occurring. So we've got issues relating to part-time work, parenting, appearance, depression, relationships, and behaviour. So the next aspect, once we've done our open coding, is to do our axial coding and then hopefully have a central code. So in doing so, they all seem to relate around this issue of mental health. And from that, we can, I guess, broadly categorize those initial categories into a few central themes. One being relationships, one being work, and one being self-esteem. And so from that, we can say, okay, well, looking at this particular piece of qualitative data, the main theme of interest is mental health, from which there are 3 themes that seem to influence mental health, that being work, relationships, and self-esteem. So when we go to discuss how does work influence mental health, we can then refer to these categories. So in this case, it may be part-time work, maybe the pressure on parenting that part-time work has, and then hopefully you can sort of see the interplay that work has with relationships on mental health. Or self-esteem has upon relationships, which then in turn impacts upon mental health. So as you can see, it's not so much a linear or a black and white answer that we're providing. It's much more intricate, much more, dare I say, shades of grey and colour that we provide when we're having qualitative data. So hopefully you can see how using qualitative data provides what we call that information-rich data. So data that provides a lot of information. It's not so linear, but it can provide the type of context to the quantitative data that sometimes lack. So you may look at a particular survey and identify that 65% of participants responded that they have concerns about their mental health. Well, that's great, but it doesn't tell you why. So the qualitative aspect will tell you, or provide you, I guess, with insights in terms of why that may be the case. So in this case, it may be, well, work is an issue, relationships are an issue, self-esteem is an issue, in terms of why 65% of participants are highlighting that mental health is an issue.